Hi, it's me. You ever wonder what the advantages of breathing deeply are? Well, according to Limbus Company, the advantage is a percentage chance to increase your damage when you attack somebody. That's right, this video is a complete guide to Poise, as it is right now near the end of Limbus Company's 5th season. It will be rather in-depth and will likely be very long, considering how long this script is, so sit down, grab some snacks, and just take a deep breath. You'll need it. The first thing we have to establish when talking about Poise is what it does. Of all the 7 major statuses in Limbus Company, Poise is probably the simplest and most universally helpful. Having Poise gives you a 5% chance per potency to land a critical hit, increasing the damage of your attack by 20% and reducing your Poise count by 1. Count also reduces by 1 at turn end, meaning a good Poise ID really needs to be able to maintain their Poise count. Once you get a guaranteed crits, or 20 plus Poise potency, it is going to go away fast unless you can maintain your count. And what's worse, there aren't actually a great deal of ways to spread Poise to allies at the time of this recording. Even the best Poise IDs tend to lack the capability to entirely maintain their Poise count using just the effects on their own skills. The Sin affinity that relates directly to Poise is Pride, and pretty much every Poise ID both has a Pride skill and has a passive that is fueled by Pride resources owned or Pride resonance. As such, running a dedicated Poise team is not going to struggle with Pride generation, which is good because it's a pretty commonly needed affinity for a lot of E.G.O as well. 2 affinities that are not common on Poise IDs, however, are Gluttony and especially Sloth. There are only 8 Poise IDs who have Gluttony, with one of those being the rare instance of Poise not having a Pride skill, one ID being objectively terrible, and one being the default Sinner ID for Ryoshu. So probably not great. Sloth IDs have it even worse, being found on only 7 IDs, with 3 of those not even having a Pride skill at all. Any team focused on Poise is inevitably going to focus on Pride Resonance if you want it to perform the best, because all of the best IDs in the archetype benefit from Resonance quite a bit, especially Pride Resonance. As a result, here are all of the Poise IDs who do not have Pride in their base skill set, and thus probably won't be the best choice for a Poise team. The only major exceptions that I feel comfortable recommending are Edgar Family Butler Ishmael and Lobotomy Corp Remnant Faust, since they each have one of the best Poise Pride Ego in the entire game to substitute for not having a Pride skill, and Ishmael has both of the rarest sin affinities for a Poise team to boot. I would never say that she's a mainstay in a Poise team, but she's definitely a very solid option should you not have one of the other members of your specific team core. Because yes, Poise is one of the archetypes that has multiple different cores. I'm going to talk about all of them, so don't worry about that, but there is a lot to talk about in this archetype. But we won't get anywhere without talking about Poise E.G.O first, so let's get to that. Poise E.G.O are the easiest way to give Poise to other allies. That said, they are also the least amount of Poise E.G.O compared to the other status effect E.G.O, so you aren't going to have too much in terms of options. There are exactly 5 Poise E.G.O capable of giving Poise to allies in addition to the user, and of those, I would say that 2 of them are objectively terrible, at the very least for that purpose. However, the other 3 are all really good, and thankfully require mostly the common sin affinities for Poise. The one that I would say is the best for team-wide Poise generation is Faust's Thoracalgia. I'm trying to get this video out before Season 5 ends, and the reason for that is because both Thoracalgia are not only very important, but also locked to Season 5. This one will still be pullable, but the other one won't be, so even if I think this one is better, probably prioritize getting the other one if you don't have either. Faust's Thoracalgia as an E.G.O does a lot of damage and can give Faust up to 3 Poise count on the first hit, but that isn't the important part. The important part is found through its resonance effects and passive. Firstly, applying Poise based on resonance to all allies is already really good, but with 3 plus Pride resonance you also apply 1 Poise count and Shallow Exhale next turn, an effect that grants 1 Poise count whenever you gain Poise at 20 plus Poise potency. It's not the most important part, but it is really nice consistency. The most important part of this E.G.O is that after every use, Faust will gain Nebulizer Alpha next turn. Nebulizer Alpha is an effect that gives all allies 1 Poise potency and count every turn. You don't actually need more than 1, but it will naturally increase for every 10 Poise count it applies via its effect, usually around 2 turns per stack. Having more Nebulizer Alpha grants HP healing to a number of allies equal to your highest resonance every turn. It's 1% of the unit's max HP per stack of Nebulizer, but that amount of healing doubles if the ally has 20 or more Poise potency, which means that it's actually a pretty good amount of HP healing for how little effort it actually takes. This is the only Poise EGO that can heal allies' HP, which is really good because taking it requires you to sacrifice access to Fluid Sac. While I would say that's worth it, it is a big hit to your reliable healing in a Poise team, so the passive healing is incredibly important. And now for the other Thoracalgia. This version of the EGO is locked behind a Season 5 event, so it will not be obtainable during Season 6 at all. Thankfully, it is a lot more selfish than Faust, so it's maybe a bit less important overall. This version of Thoracalgia gains power based on your Poise, and just generally deals far more damage than its sister EGO, like a lot more damage. It also applies Deep Inhale to Ryoshu, a status that stacks up to 20 and allows Ryoshu to consume Poise potency to gain up to an 80% damage boost on critical hit, which is undeniably really powerful. This version of the EGO also has its own version of Nebulizer in Nebulizer Beta. This one always gives 3 Poise potency and count to both herself and a number of other allies equal to its count when you trigger Pride Absolute Resonance. This is insanely good, better than Faust if at a maximum stack. However, even though Pride Resonance is easy to get in Poise, Pride Absolute Resonance can still be tricky without using EGO or defense skills. Plus, the only way to gain Nebulizer Beta is to use the EGO or to specifically kill other units with Thoracalgia itself. So while it is stronger than Faust at its maximum capacity, it takes a lot more effort to get there, which is why I'd say it's the weaker of the two for supporting a team. That said, it's one of the best Pride EGO for damage, so it still has a very important purpose. The last of the important EGO is Ishmael's Blind Obsession. This was a Battle Pass EGO, so while it is obtainable at all times, the only way to get it is by using 400 Ishmael EGO shards if you don't already have it. It's absolutely a worthwhile investment though. As a VoV EGO, it has 7 attack weight, with every one of those weight giving +2 Poise count to a random ally on hit. Additionally, it heals your 4 lowest SP allies for 25 SP, and Ishmael will pretty much always be one of those. What's even better is that it gives 2 Pierce power up and 2 damage up to 4 other allies with the highest SP, and that applies before the SP heals, so it at least probably won't hit Ishmael herself. While it is same turn, there's good odds that it affects 1 or 2 other allies before the end of the turn, and it being Pierce power up is especially significant for later. The passive also gives haste and the equivalent to 1 damage up and 1 clash power up to a single ally, and while it does inflict 5 sinking to that ally, it's still a net positive overall. Absolutely shard it if you can afford it and want to play a Poise team. I'm not going to talk about the corrosions of these EGO because I don't think any of them matter for their applications of the Poise team. Ryoshu's can do some funny things with its targeting always hitting at least 1 ally, even when overclocked, and the Pride, Fragility, and HP healing that Blind Obsession can inflict is definitely not useless. But they're all extremely expensive to use manually, and killing an ally to super optimize Refraction Railway using Thoracalgia is not likely something everyone will care about. That's not to say they are the only good EGO in Poise though. Both Ryoshu's Blind Obsession and Don Quixote's Wishing Cairn have passives that can give their respective users some poise on killing an enemy. Whilst not strictly necessary, especially for Wishing Cairn since it isn't Pride, these can be helpful passives to activate in case you're missing some other Poise stuff. Otis's Sun Shower gives a ton of Poise count just for using it and allows Otis to gain Poise for winning clashes. While she doesn't have an ID that necessarily needs this, it gives so much Poise that 1 or 2 uses can turn any Otis ID into a makeshift Poise ID. So keep that in mind if you have it and are looking to build a team on a budget. And Heathcliff's Fell Bullet allows him to both gain 3 Poise with 3+ Resonance, and is just a really solid skill for damage that also happens to be Pride. And aside from Wishing Cairn Don Quixote, it is the only Poise EGO that does not have limited availability based on it being seasonal. Soda can heal your HP. It's not really that great of an EGO, and it isn't technically a Poise EGO because it can't generate any Poise, but it does gain improved effects on crit, and the passive SP healing it provides is really nice in longer wave-based fights. Still, it's better than nothing at least. And that is every relevant Poise EGO. I was not kidding when I said that they didn't have a lot. That said, it's important to note that any Pride EGO has a place in a Poise team for activating resonance effects. Stuff that has literally nothing to do with Poise is still worth bringing along simply to trigger Pride Resonance. This is especially noteworthy because the majority of base EGO happen to be Pride, and so all of those have a useful niche within its team, while also being available to literally everybody. Now on to the IDs themselves. I mentioned there being multiple team cores for Poise, and that's because you usually want to build your Poise team to specialize into one of the physical damage types. Slash and Pierce have the majority of the best effects for a Poise team to increase their damage. There are Poise IDs that have primarily blunt skills, but they're kinda... But yes, in addition to there being Poise IDs that inflict fragile and defense level down for general damage upgrades, there is also a wide variety who inflict slash fragility and pierce fragility specifically. By matching your damage type to the type of specific fragility you inflict in your main team, you're going to have a much easier time dealing massive damage, especially in single target fights. So knowing that, let's go over the team cores. We're going to do the standard 4-unit team core, and I'll of course go over budget options whenever they are available. That being said, in the Slash Poise core specifically, which also just happens to be the general Poise core for the record, there is one unit that is absolutely irreplaceable, and that is Blade Lineage Mentor Merceau. Blade Lineage Merceau literally invented a lot of the things IDs are allowed to be nowadays, and he's still one of the best units as a result of that. His main niche is empowering Blade Lineage allies to an absurd degree. With just 3 Pride Resonance, he applies 1 Poise Potency and Count to 2 other Blade Lineage allies whenever he gains Poise, and applies Swordplay of the Homeland to all other Blade Lineage allies, an effect that increases the critical damage of all skills, increases the coin power of skills 1 and 2, and increases the base damage of skill 3. His skill 1 and 2 also apply their respective Sword of the Homeland effects to up to your highest absolute resonance other Blade Lineage allies, with skill 1 increasing the final power of skill 1 and skill 2 likewise doing for skill 2. Since the goal is to activate Pride Resonance a lot, you'll likely get absolute resonance a decent amount of those times in the process. As for the skills themselves, Merceau gains enough poise count on all of them so as not to have an issue with that, but his poise potency gain is slower than the average ID. This is because the coin power on his skills is tied to his poise potency, so you want anything you can get to help maintain that. Additionally, his skill 2 and defense skill give him some slash power up, and since all of his skills are slash, that's incredibly useful to have. Having 2 different pride skills that make up 5/6 of his entire skill rotation is also really helpful for aiding the Pride Resonance, so he's also the most useful member of the team in that regard. There's also his skill 3, which is designed to lose a clash. When it does lose a clash, you get to counter with one of the most powerful skills in the game, with 4 coins and up to 3 attack weight with enough poise. On top of the massive damage, it also inflicts 5 paralyze next turn, and the damage is increased by an additional 100% if it only hits a single target. That said, it is a little inconsistent to actually lose a clash since the minimum roll is 12, and while it prevents you from being staggered while using it, it does not prevent death. You need 3 Pride Resonance for his passive to help with that particular issue. And there's another important thing into his kit. You really want other Blade Lineage IDs for him to be most useful. I would suggest 3 at a minimum, and as a result of him being so reliable, a Poise team using this core isn't likely to change a lot unless we get some other IDs who do something similar. So, if you bring 2 other Blade Lineage units, who might be the best ones? In my opinion, the answer is Blade Lineage Xiaosu Yi Sang and Blade Lineage Xiaosu Faust. Blade Lineage Yi Sang's kit is super simple, and to prove that point, I'm going to fit his entirety of his skills into my usual text boxes all at once. He has high base rolls with a low poise count, and deals a ton of damage with his skill 3. Assistance from Blade Lineage Merceau makes his poise extremely consistent to maintain. The best part of his kit is his passive, allowing him to gain poise count from winning a clash, but more importantly, increasing his coin power for every 5 poise count he has, up to 3. This coin power can apply to E.G.O, meaning that if he ever does get a decent multi-coin E.G.O, he will have a huge benefit just for that. And he does technically fuel one of his own E.G.O that applies poise to allies, but since it requires you to kill an ally to make it effective, I would call it really bad, but you can bring it if you want, I suppose. He does perfectly fuel it. Faust is more complicated. Her kit revolves around landing critical hits to inflict Red Plum Blossom, a unique type of bleed that increases the amount of critical damage that units deal to those inflicted with it. It also technically increases critical hit chance, but the 10% it gives is calculated independently from your own poise, and no, you cannot get a double crit. Her poise count generation is fantastic, but outside of her skill 3, she is not great at getting poise potency. That skill 3 also inflicts slash fragility on crit if the target has 10 Red Plum Blossom, which it also inflicts on crit before it calculates for the slash fragility. Her passive also enables her to inflict more Red Plum Blossom and maybe a little bit of defense level down if you're particularly lucky. Her skill 1 is fantastic for damage since it has 3 coins, and the additional coin power from Swordplay of the Homeland makes it really good at clashing as well. And the most important thing is that not only does bringing her give you access to Thoracalgia, solving the poise issues that her and Merceau have, but she also has the perfect sin affinities to fuel it by herself. While the idea is not amazing on its own, having consistent access to an ego that both spreads poise and heals allies makes her an incredibly important addition to the party that can't really be overlooked. Her skill 2 is fine. It's not slash and it only has 2 coins, but the bind infliction is nice, and it being her pride skill means it still has important value to her overall kit. The last member of the Slash Poise core is not a Blade Lineage ID, but is instead Edgar Family Butler Ryoshu. Much like Blade Lineage Faust, she has access to Thoracalgia, this time dealing slash damage, and perfectly fuels it on her own, so you'll definitely want to have it with you, especially since it deals way more damage than most other Poise EGO do. Her skills are frankly mediocre overall. They all have only 2 coins, and the majority of her poise gain is just poise count, since she uses it as a resource to increase the attack weight of her skill 2. It's a genuinely good AoE skill that can deal a lot of damage should it land crits, especially if she has Deep Breath. Her skill 3 is also just a really high rolling skill, and her only real source of poise potency. You want to use it as soon as possible in a fight to slingshot her poise gain. Also, if it kills a target with the second coin, she literally commits BM by using it a second time against a target who has, well, BM, or Butler Mark. Butler Mark, as an effect, does effectively nothing. All of Ryoshu's skills inflict it, and on top of her skill reuse, it also makes her passive function. She gains 1 poise count and 1 haste on hitting an enemy who has it, even without a crit, and it increases the critical damage by up to 60% based on how fast she is, though it does remove the effect if she crits that enemy. Every single one of her coin power conditionals is based on her speed, so having a really easy way to gain haste is incredibly nice to increase her consistency. Another reason that she's so important is that she has a ton of helpful ego even outside of Thoracalgia. She has the aforementioned Blind Obsession, which is not hard to fuel if you want to bring it, but it's also worth mentioning that Red Eyes both inflicts slash fragility and helps her speed consistency. It does require Gluttony to fuel though, so keep that in mind, but it being Season 0 means you can get it whenever you want, so if you don't have Blind Obsession, it's still a good option. Force for the Flames is just incredible, inflicting up to 2 fragile and providing a passive increase to her damage, plus she perfectly fuels it and it's super cheap. And Contempt Awe is pretty easy to fuel despite its high cost. It being Lust means you can get to 5 Resonance with Pride without having to worry about accidentally tanking your damage on the next turn, and the passive allows you to get your least owned resources passively by just using her skills. She's just insanely helpful in a poise setup thanks to all her helpful ego, and as a result, she really shouldn't be missed. That's what I believe is the best Slash Poise team core for 4 units, but of course there are other additions and substitutions that you can make. If you don't have one of the 3 that aren't Blade Lineage Merceau, there's a really good budget option in Blade Lineage Salsu Don Quixote. Her damage is not as high as the other members of Blade Lineage. Her main upsides are having a sloth skill and giving poise to allies. Her passive gives a little bit of poise whenever she gains poise herself, and with an activation requirement of only 2 Pride Resonance, it'll probably be active. Her skill 2 gives some poise potency to an ally on its second hit, and that amount doubles if it's being applied to a fellow member of Blade Lineage, and her skill 3 does the same thing except with poise count. Plus, if the last coin also defeats an enemy, it gives some slash damage up to herself and 1 other ally. Plus, this skill actually does really nice damage if it hits all heads, even without a crit. Her biggest downside is that her Pride skill 1 isn't slash, it's pierce. That being said, a Pride of 8 is really solid to have since it means she can not attack and still contribute to your Pride resonance for everyone else's effects. There's also nothing stopping you from bringing a full team of Blade Lineage units since they get additional bonuses from Merceau if you have all 6. The main reason that Blade Lineage Salsu Sinclair and Blade Lineage Salsu Otis are not in the core team or substitutions is because Sinclair is aggressively average with really low clash power on his low rank skills, and Otis just, well, she sucks outside of a team of 6 Blade Lineage units. Both of them become significantly better in a full team, and the fact that Sinclair has a Gluttony skill can be pretty helpful overall. He's actually decent enough to be an okay substitute for the rest of your team in case you're missing a core member, as his skill 3 deals a crazy amount of damage with a crit, though he's a bit of an investment if you don't already have him. But do not bring Blade Lineage Otis unless you bring all 5 of the others. There aren't a great deal of other Poise units with slash skills, but luckily there don't really have to be. With the exception of Edgar Family Butler Ishmael and She Association South Section 6 Ishmael, you've hit the majority of your slash skills, though this core is also great for the general Poise team in case you don't have the resources for the other core, and there's a pretty good chance that you don't. Sung Association Sinclair is the frontrunner in my opinion, since he has really good clashing, the ability to generate gluttony, the ability to inflict fragile with his skill 3, which helps your damage a lot, and he perfectly feels his own lantern, which is both a strong healing ego and also slash, so you benefit regardless. Kurokuma Rodian is not a fantastic ID since she struggles to maintain her own poise, but in a team with a lot of ability to help her generate poise, she becomes quite a bit more usable. She's similar to Blade Lineage Sinclair in that her skill 3 deals quite a lot of damage with a crit. She also has some bonus points for having both a Pride defense skill, which becomes her skill 3 with enough poise, and a really cheap Pride-based ego within what is cast. So the fact that her skill 3 is her Pride skill doesn't hold her back from being able to contribute to Pride resonance. Other strong IDs include the ones who help with resource generation. Twinnock Pirates Gregor, Sunk East Don Quixote, Sunk West Merceau, and Full Stop Office Hong Lu all provide one of the rare sin affinities that Poise struggles with, and in the case of Gregor and Hong Lu, they even have the perfect affinities for Faust Thoracalgia, which is always a plus. Pequod Ishmael doesn't primarily focus on Poise, but her skill 2 allowing for assist attack makes her a great option in Pride Resonance teams, and can even help other units generate more Poise per turn. We'll talk about her more later, so I won't linger on this one for now. And any of the other strong Poise IDs that I haven't mentioned yet can also just be added here. Pequod Heathcliff, Sunk Otis, and Full Stop Heathcliff being the big ones. What's she doing here? She does not generate poise at all. Why did you let her into the room? Fine, let's address Magic Bullet Otis. Magic Bullet Otis is simultaneously not a poise unit, and one of the most consistent units for landing a critical hit. Half of her entire kit is Pride, and you won't find a single bit of poise on it, except for her passive, which gives up to 20 poise when it activates. Plus, there's the matter of her Magic Bullet Ego, which is incredibly consistent for a Pride ego and helps to accelerate her magic bullet gain quite a bit. She's genuinely great in a proper Poise team as a 6th member, and pairs insanely nicely with Sunk East Don Quixote. To save you the trouble of going through her entire kit, a single use of Sun Shower combined with a single activation of her passive and support from Faust Thoracalgia make her incredibly consistent as a pseudo-Poise unit. That being said, both the Magic Bullet ID and E.G.O are locked behind Walpurgis Nacht, so the chance of you having both is realistically pretty low. But it is a fun unit to add in addition, and you can definitely feel the synergy should you bring her. Hell, even in Mirror Dungeon, you can use her as your 6th unit and still get the full benefits of all the Poise fusion gifts on the rest of your team. Seven Faust does the same thing, by the way, but unlike Magic Bullet Otis, she doesn't really have an easy way to keep her poise count due to having a lot of coins, and keeping Rupture on an enemy is also harder to do. Oh, and not having Sun Shower, that's also an important part of it. And speaking of being locked behind Walpurgis Nacht, the Pierce Poise core is probably the better of the two in general, since the Pierce Poise units are more recent and more powerful as a result. That said, the most important two units in this core are Walpurgis Nacht only. It would be wrong not to go over them though, so buckle up because this core is 4 entirely different units from the other one. Let's rip off the band-aid immediately. The two Walpurgis Nacht units for this core are Full Stop Office Fixer Hong Lu and Full Stop Office Fixer Heathcliff. It centers around Full Stop Heathcliff's skill 2, Headshot. Not only is the ID himself insanely fast and good at clashing, but this skill can inflict up to 3 Pierce Fragility per turn. Despite only having a single coin, it also deals really good damage. The reason that this skill is even as good as it is, not that it's bad to begin with, isn't even found in his own kit, but rather in Hong Lu's. Target Marked is a fantastic skill to begin with due to pretty easily gaining 3 final power, inflicting both bind and attack power down, and having great crit damage conditionals. But it also has the Target Spotted effect, which has a minimum of 50% chance to activate with only 2 resonance, and a guaranteed activation at 4 resonance. This makes it so that after Target Marked ends, Heathcliff will immediately use Headshot one-sided against the same target. This not only deals a ton of extra damage, but it also inflicts more Pierce Fragility, and both of these IDs are really fast, so the rest of your team can probably take advantage of that. And if that wasn't good enough, Full Stop to Life does the exact same thing, except it doesn't rely on resonance, it just always happens. This skill also inflicts 2 Pierce Fragility by itself, meaning that Headshot gets an additional 20% damage increase, but it also still inflicts Bind. This is why this team's core is so cost prohibitive. You really need them both to be together to get the maximum effectiveness out of them. That being said, both IDs are insanely solid on their own anyways. These are both ammo IDs, and the main thing restricting ammo IDs is that they don't do super well in extremely long fights, since when they run out of ammo, they stop being able to attack. Well, both of these IDs have ways to counteract that downside. Hong Lu straight up can just attack without ammo, but he loses his power conditionals and the hits themselves don't do anything if they would normally need ammo to inflict. This doesn't really make too big of a difference though, since the important effects of his skill 2 and 3 are all on coins that don't require ammo in the first place. He also gains 1 poise count every combat start if he's over 20 poise, which is the only part of everything I just mentioned that needs anything to activate, since it's part of his actual passive. Heathcliff actually can run out of ammo, at which point he will retreat and will sub in deployment slot 7, but before we get to that, there is the rest of his kit to talk about. He gains a ton of Pierce power up on the first turn just for free, so that's nice. His actual passive gives him up to 2 haste if he has enough poise, which is always super helpful for him, but it also gives him Pierce power up and 10 poise next turn if he didn't use an attack that turn. And he also gives an ally some poise at combat start just for fun if he fills the same conditionals. What's better is that it doesn't even count using Headshot if it activates as a result of Hong Lu's skills, so Heathcliff's admittedly pretty good evade is worthwhile even if you still have ammo left. It also becomes a clashable guard if he's out of ammo. Wait, what's that melee support keyword? Yeah, so if Heathcliff uses a defense skill after he's done using it, Hong Lu uses a pretty decent skill as a one-sided attack against the attacker. This is so Heath can still attack once finally out of ammo after retreating and then coming back with full ammo again. By the way, I didn't mention that he gets all of his ammo back after retreating, and Hong Lu can also reload once per encounter by using his defense skill at 0 ammo. And even after all of that, Heathcliff has a skill 3 that can literally gib enemies because it deals so much damage that it can easily one-shot almost anything that isn't a boss with a crit. And the astute of you might notice that this isn't even the good version of his skill 3. The first time he uses skill 3, he actually uses this variant by spending his 1 special ammo that he starts every fight with. And even after all of that, if Heathcliff is on the bench and Hong Lu is active, Hong Lu's skills 2 and 3 get an additional unbreakable coin added to the end that have massive crit damage bonuses. I'm sorry that I have to jump between them so often, but with how much they gain from just being on the field together, it really does feel like they are 2 units combined into 1 set. They support each other so well that just the 2 of them can almost entirely outclass the other 4 units in the previous Poise Core. If they weren't tied to Walpurgisnacht, I would feel much better recommending them to everybody. And I didn't even mention Heathcliff's support passive, which just gives free poise count to the unit with the least ammo every turn, and it matters because once he retreats, his support passive is activated. So you would expect, after all that, we would move on to a unit who doesn't have an insane amount of mechanics to keep track of. Well, I wish that were the case, but it is simply not true. That's because the Pequod Captain Ishmael has a similar effect to target spotted in assist attack on her skill 2, in an ID that is entirely pierce damage, on a skill that is pride. Assist attack has a 20% chance of occurring for every resonance that you have, and it makes the unit to her right, or if there are no units to her right on the dashboard, the one to her immediate left, immediately use their skill 1 after Ishmael's attack finishes. Not only does having 3 separate IDs who can make allies use additional skills add an obscene amount of extra damage, it also makes you generate ego resources much more quickly. Oh yeah, and at 4+ resonance, the ally using the assist attack gains 20% more damage, and if it's Pride Absolute Resonance, they also gain 2 Pride power up. Plus, the skill gives 1 Clash Power's worth of offense level up to 2 adjacent units on the dashboard at combat start as well. On top of this, Pequod Ishmael has 2 ways in her kit to spread poise to allies, which is always incredibly valuable. With 3 Pride Resonance, her passive gives 2 allies 4 poise and 7 SP if Ishmael defeats an enemy. Her skill 3 adds to this by applying 2 poise potency, 4 poise count, and 10 SP to other allies based on your absolute resonance, and will always hit a minimum of 1 ally if you trigger absolute resonance at all. This skill also gains a damage bonus from the enemy being at a lower HP percentage, making it like I can cook anything and rampage. Her guard is both pride and gives a free SP heal to 2 other allies, and let's not forget that bringing Ishmael at all gives you access to Blind Obsession, an ego that she has 3 of the 4 necessary sin affinities for, and both Heathcliff and Honglu provide the missing one in Gloom. The main argument against bringing this ID is her unique SP mechanics. She still gains SP on winning clashes and getting kills, and even gains SP if allies die, which is unique to her. However, if an ally kills an enemy that is higher level than Ishmael, unless the kill was caused by assist attack, she will lose SP. And this can snowball pretty quickly if you kill a lot of high-level enemies each turn. This just highlights the importance of this ID being at the maximum possible level, but even then, certain enemies have a high level now but get their stats reduced to match yours, so it will always be an issue. I just don't see it as a big enough issue to be worth leaving her behind. And the 4th core team member, the one that is so much simpler than the other 3, we have everyone's favorite German boy cosplaying as a French garçon in Sunk Association South Section 4 director Sinclair. You have no idea how nice it is that this guy's kit is so simple. This is already page 13 of my script. Sunk Sinclair is similar to Blade Lineage Faust in that he can only really gain poise count from his own skills, with the exception of his skill 3, which converts a bunch of count into potency. And that skill 3 is a really important part of his kit, allowing him to inflict up to 2 fragile after a clash win if is the only unit targeting that enemy slot, which can be very useful against an enemy with multiple parts or multiple skill slots in general. It also inflicts his declared duel to the target, which gives him 1 free clash power against that target in perpetuity, as long as he doesn't do it again, and gives him a ton of haste after hitting them. Speed is a very integral part of his kit, with skill 1 giving haste on hit, and all of his coin power conditionals being tied to his speed. And speaking of his speed, his passive can increase his max speed by up to 6 based on how much poise count he currently has. Without any haste, this can turn his speed range into a 4 to 14. Plus, with the exception of Ishmael, all of these core IDs are incredibly fast, so it's rather likely that you get that additional 10% pierce damage that hits also on his passive. Out of every ID that I've talked about in this video, this one is also the best one for general use. He's completely self-sustaining, to the point that he even perfectly fuels his own lantern for healing. And that's all there is really to say about him. He clashes high enough and is fast enough that he's just always reliable in any team, and him being mono Pierce means he just happens to be incredible alongside the rest of the Pierce core. The rest of these IDs are ones that are either great substitutes for the missing members of the Pierce core, or great as your 5th, 6th, and 7th units to bring, since you'll need a 7th if Heathcliff ever retreats. Sunk Marceau and Sunk Otis are both incredibly fast, and happen to be Poise IDs that are mono Pierce. Marceau is basically a Sunk Sinclair too, but his conditionals also rely on Rupture to get the most value out of him. Rupture just serves as extra damage in a Poise team, and if you continue attacking the same slot every turn, his focused attack will make his skills roll higher than even Sinclair's, and the ability to reuse his last skill if the last coin kills the enemy is insanely good. That said, he does end up being a bit slower, and also can't inflict Fragile at all, which is why I would put Sinclair ahead of him, but it isn't too far ahead. Otis, on the other hand, provides a unique set of niches. She clashes really high once her conditionals are met, has an insane evade that is tied to the best in the entire game, and generates aggro to redirect attacks away from your more frail units. Plus, her skill 3 can even give other allies some additional haste to make their speed conditionals more consistent. If you're missing full stop Heathcliff specifically, then Pequod Heathcliff can be a good substitute in the meantime. He's still mono Pierce, is incredibly tanky, and has very high damage, and it isn't like full stop Honglu is a bad idea without his partner. In fact, he's pretty far from it. Sunk East Don Quixote is very similar to Sunk West Marceau in that she gets most of her conditionals from being really fast. She's mono Pierce, has the ability to inflict defense level down, even if it won't ever be the max amounts. She can't fulfill her burn conditionals on her own, and Nerve Strike is a slightly weaker but also less restrictive focused attack. Twin Hook Pirate Gregor can deal particularly high damage with his skill 3, and also happens to be mono Pierce. While he has a lot of bleed conditionals that can't necessarily be fulfilled, gaining additional poise count from full stop Heathcliff's support passive can help him maintain his poise in the admittedly rare case that he happens to run out on his own. And lastly, Pequod Yi Sang is a unit that admittedly clashes kinda low, but once his poise is supplied, he has one of the highest skill 2 damages in the game, and he has a pride defense skill for the resonance that doesn't matter in this team permutation. And keep in mind that if you're missing any of these for your last 2 to 3 slots, you can always slot in any of the good IDs from the other core and see an equal amount of success. I personally recommend Blade Lineage Faust and Butler Ryoshu, so you can take advantage of the Thoracalgios. With Faust especially, since her skill 2 is Pierce, and her Thoracalgia also happens to deal Pierce damage. Now, would you believe me if I told you there was another team to talk about? This one's not as long of a discussion, but basically, there are a ton of Poise IDs who also happen to inflict bleed and have conditionals based on bleed. This video is long enough as it is, but the general core of the team is Pequod Heathcliff, Pequod Ishmael, Twin Hook Pirate Gregor, Blade Lineage Faust. From this point, you only need one other Poise Bleed ID to create a full team to hopefully take advantage of both statuses. Pequod Yisang and Kurokuma Rodian both fulfill this conditional, but there's also smaller things like how Blade Lineage Sinclair and Blade Lineage Merceau inflict 3 bleed with their skill 3 under optimal conditions, which is just great. Plus, the way you can take a 6th non-Poise team member to have other synergies. IDs like Princess of La Mancha Land Rodian, who has a Pride skill 1, buffs allies, and overall is just an insanely good unit, works here. Ring Yisang doesn't get Poise naturally and lacks a Pride skill, but he is one of, if not the best ID in the entire game, and also happens to be Bleed. And Kurokuma Clan Wakashu Ryoshu is a Bleed ID that both provides good defensive effects, a lot of bleed count, and still has a Pride skill to help trigger Pride Absolute Resonance to gain Poise after a use of Thoracalgia. I'm not so versed in this particular dual archetype to make recommendations on how to use them, but I can say that as long as you have the main 4 Bloise IDs, as it were, you can slot in 1 Poise ID and 1 Bleed ID as your last 2 slots and take full benefit of the Poise and Bleed fusion gifts in the Mirror Dungeon for some very funny stat increases. In terms of support passives that you want to use with a Poise team, any passive that triggers off of Pride Owned or Pride Resonance to increase damage or speed is incredibly helpful. The best damage increases for Pride support passive come from Sunk South Don Quixote, Blade Lineage Sinclair, Sunk South Otis, who gives some Clash power up but also gives damage if the ally is from Sunk Association, Blade Lineage Otis, a Pirate Gregor specifically for the Pierce score. Blade Lineage Merceau can also give an increase to crit damage if you for some reason don't want to bring him. There's also a variety of support passives that aid in gaining Poise for some of your team members. The most powerful ones of these belong to Full Stop Heathcliff, who we've spoken about already, Blade Lineage Yisang, who makes an ally gain a bunch of extra Poise count since it triggers when gaining potency as well, and Blade Lineage Dawn, who speeds up Poise potency gain and is worth having even if you don't intend to bring her. Thankfully, she's a double lot ID, so she isn't too expensive. LCCB Ryoshu can actually also give Poise to allies in teams that feature Poise IDs that spend ammo. 3 Poise potency per turn on spending ammo is not an insignificant amount, and a 50% damage bonus for your last bullet can actually trigger twice for Full Stop Honglu or Full Stop Heathcliff if they end up reloading during the fight. But if for some reason you don't want to bring them, Pequod Ishmael and Butler Ryoshu also give additional Poise with their support passives, so if you're using them on the bench, they still have value. Butler Ryoshu can also give haste with hers, which leads to the last category of Pride support passives, the ones that increase speed. These are not particularly common. Butler Ryoshu and Sunk Merceau granted to an ally when they win a clash, which is pretty easy to activate, and Sunk Sinclair, though likely in your party, can give up to 5 per turn when an ally wins with their evade. The last support passive to mention belongs to Zwei West Ishmael. 2 defense level up is not particularly needed in any team, but a little added bulk to an archetype with a lot of frail IDs is not necessarily going to be a bad thing. And finally, we reach the Mirror Dungeon section. Poise is one of the most universal type of ego gifts since theoretically any ID can benefit from it. There are so many gifts that give Poise that I'm not going to talk about them individually since it's just not that worth it. The ones that just give Poise for free that aren't too interesting to talk about are Stone Tomb, Pendant of Nostalgia, Endorphin Kit, Ornamental Horseshoe, Emerald Elytra, Giant Gift Sack, Pom-Pom Hat, Jolly Plushie, and CQC Manual, which only works for ammo IDs. There's also a small subsection of ego gifts that specifically activate when you crit an enemy. 4-Leaf Clover gives a bunch of Poise potency and count on the turn after you get a crit. Broken Blade, which is exclusive to the Yield My Flesh to Claim Their Bones pack, makes a crit deal additional Pride damage based on how much Poise you have. Old Wooden Doll inflicts some defense level down on getting a crit for your front deployed IDs, and Cetacean Heart allows you to inflict more status effects with a crit and gives a chance to not consume your Poise count on a crit. Gear Shrapnel, which is exclusive to the Full Stopped with a Bullet theme pack, is kinda in the middle of these two topics, as it increases the crit damage of your first coin each turn, while also giving a small defensive boost to units who have Poise. Dark Flame Smoking Pipe is also in the middle, granting your first deployed ally an increase in their pierce damage, as well as 2 attack power-up and 1 fragile every single turn, and also giving them 5 poise before attack if the enemy's defense level is currently being reduced. The last category is gifts that give buffs when a unit has poise. Devil's Share gives a small amount of haste to the allies who have the most poise potency and count respectively. Angel's Cut is exclusive to Mirror Dungeon Hard, and converts 1 poise potency into 1 poise count each turn, and Harpoon Prosthetic Leg gives a sizable boost to the ally with the most total poise, while also giving 1 max speed to Pequod IDs. Now on to the actual interesting gifts. The combination of Nebulizer and Cigarette Holder is something that literally any team can take advantage of. Nebulizer gives everyone a sizable amount of poise at the start of an encounter, and gives a bit more when triggering Pride Absolute Resonance. It's worth noting that when fully upgraded, this changes to just Pride Resonance, which means it's pretty helpful to upgrade it. And Cigarette Holder gives 1 power-up to all allies who have poise at the start of the turn, and an additional power-up if they have 5 or more poise count, which is just really easy to maintain. Finifugality increases your clash power and gives damage up bonuses that both increase based on the combined poise potency and count on each of your first 2 deployed units. This gift is absurdly good for damage and shouldn't ever be skipped if it's an option in a poise run. Nebulizer and Harpoon Prosthetic Leg also combine to make Guiding Gas Lamp, which, while it increases the base effects of both Nebulizer and Harpoon Prosthetic Leg, while also giving Pequod IDs an insane boost, it loses the resonance effect of Nebulizer to gain more poise, so it's probably worse than just upgrading Nebulizer. Recollection of a Certain Day grants 2 final power to the skill 3 of IDs who can gain poise without their passives, which is always nice to have, and it combines with Pendant of Nostalgia, making Reminiscence, a gift that has the same effect as Pendant of Nostalgia, while also changing the 2 final power of Recollection into 1 coin power instead. Reminiscence, Ornamental Horseshoe, and 4-Leaf Clover all combine to make Lucky Pouch, which gives an ass load of poise on the turn after a crit, as well as a small amount to 1 ally every turn regardless, while also increasing the final power of the skill 3 of all Poise IDs by 3, coin power based on how many coins they have, and damage based on how many coins they have. It's crazy strong as a gift, and it is always worth making in a Poise run if you can. Devil's Share, Angel's Cut, and Endorphin Kit combine to make Cask Spirits, which combines Angel's Cut and Devil's Share while increasing the haste gain by 1 and granting 1 offense level up for some reason, and grants a ton of extra poise when gaining it from your own effect. More importantly though, it is the only gift in the entire Mirror Dungeon that causes you to discard a skill, which it does at high enough poise, enabling Poise IDs to cycle out their lower level skills. It's already best to replace your skill 1 with a skill 3 on any ID except Blade Lineage Merceau, but this allows you to get your skill 3s that are being boosted by Lucky Pouch far more often. There's also 2 fusion gifts exclusive to the Yield My Flesh to Claim Their Bones theme packs. The first one combines Broken Blade and Rusted Hilt to make Unbending, which only activates if you have 3 or more Blade Lineage allies. It gives 2 slash power up and 35% more slash damage to all allies, and gives a boosted Broken Blade effect for more Pride damage, but makes it so that only Blade Lineage IDs get that effect. Then there's also Cultivation, which combines Broken Blade with Worn Hilt. It has the same slash increasing effect, but Broken Blade's effect isn't upgraded, but still gets locked to Blade Lineage IDs, and instead it makes it so that Blade Lineage IDs can consume 10 poise when over 30 poise to gain 2 slash damage up. It's probably just worse than Unbending, if I'm being honest. There's also Ragged Bamboo Hat, which isn't a fusion gift but still requires 3 Blade Lineage IDs to work. It increases slash damage of the entire party by 50%, makes it so that Blade Lineage units will crit regardless of their poise as long as they have at least 1, and makes it so that Blade Lineage units deal 50% more damage on a critical hit. It's always worth it if you have the right number of Blade Lineage units. Old Dopo Robe is not a poise gift, but rather a Blade Lineage gift. It still gives everyone 50% more slash damage, and boosts the coin power of Blade Lineage skill 1s based on the amount of coins they have. It also makes Yield My Flesh specifically roll 12 less, and increases the damage of Merceaus to claim their bones by 50%, which is hilarious. Then we have Fragment of Conceit, a gift that basically reads, Blind Obsession, Fell Bullet, and Thoracalgia become nuclear warheads. Because it increases their damage and power by an absurd amount, And finally, one of the single best ego gifts in the entire Mirror Dungeon, we have Clear Mirror Calm Water. This makes the base critical damage multiplier increase to 70% over 20%, and grants 10 offense level up if an ally crits and that crit consumes poise count. This is a ridiculous increase to both damage and clash power, and when upgraded fully, the base damage of a critical hit becomes 150% higher than usual, and you gain 5 additional offense level up. If you get this gift in a Mirror Dungeon, regardless of what team you're running, your run shifts into grabbing gifts that grant poise in order so you can take full advantage of it. Well, that was a lot. Sorry this one took so long. I got into a really bad creative slump during the entirety of February and couldn't figure out a way how to start the script off, and it didn't exactly help that every update introduced another new piece of poise support that was absolutely, well, not required, but extremely valuable. I really hope this video comes out within Season 5, but just in case it doesn't, I have added all the limited IDs or the ones with limited ego to my company in case you don't have them. But if it is still Season 5, get the Thoracalgias before the season ends if you want to run Poise. That's about all I wanted to talk about. I know this one was really long, but I tried to be as informative as possible with it. I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed, and also commented. This video has been a lot of work, and I really appreciate the support you've been giving me recently, as I'm really close to 10,000 subs, and honestly probably over it by the time this thing comes out. With all that out of the way, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.